When you think of a good conversation, we think of an interplay, don't we? Both sides are having something interesting to say. And a fundamental ability of that is being able to listen well. To improve as a painter, you need to learn to listen to what your painting is telling you. Obviously not in words, but when we start a painting, it's like we're doing all the talking. We could say, we're blocking it in. It's a bit like we're giving a lecture. You have to get your thesis out there for discussion. But as you get closer to finishing, you start standing back more and more, seeing things in relation. And as you do that, you in fact are starting to listen. But there's a point when you feel you've pretty much laid in the whole painting the way you had it in mind, or not. And then is the time to really stop and listen. What hangs together? What jumps out? What needs adjusting? This is the listening process. There's a bit, that part's a little too dark. That's too big. That's unclear. That seems to be shouting, and so on. The best way is to leave the room completely. Immerse your attention in something completely different and then come back. And what's the first thing your painting says to you? The first thing that pulls your eye out of a unified whole, the big thing. So let's look at a few examples to show what I mean using some student images. This is Ian Roberts and Mastering Composition. In each case, and this is important technique, have your eye softly on the whole image, on the image as a whole. And in each case, notice how your eye tends to get pulled within the image. Your eye is doing this automatically. Just be easy and watch it happen. It's an important technique to learn. So let's start with this image. After getting your painting to this point, say, you sit with it patiently. And you may know something's off, but you're not quite sure what it is yet. But don't just pick up a brush and go after this bit and that bit. You want to find the big problem and solve that. That's what you need to listen for. Otherwise, you'll just overwork your painting. Now, see what happens if I adjust for the two biggest problems. Do you see how now you fall back into the painting, back into the illusion of depth? What did I do? Two things. I simplified those tree shapes against the sky. The photo might have been like that, but they attract a lot of attention to something that's actually sort of peculiar. And I darkened the water in the bottom left so that your eye gets released from that hard contrast there. I'm using Procreate to make these changes, not super carefully, just so you get the idea of the change. And again, see how by releasing those two elements, there is a more unified sense to the whole painting. I didn't touch anything else. One thing about painting from photos, look at this photo. This isn't much of a photo to be used for a painting, but it illustrates the idea well. The water reflects the light of the sky. If you have your attention easily on that whole image, you can feel your attention getting pulled down into the water in the foreground because the water's surrounded by darks. We're being pulled by that contrast. Now, if you paint the water like that in the photo, you will have the same problem in your painting. Photos are references to get started. They almost always have elements you need to adjust in order to pull them together to make a successful painting. So each time you come back to the studio, what is it that grips your attention? What is the big picture? The one problem? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe you're finished. But spend some time looking perhaps at the painting in a mirror or upside down. But be patient, waiting for that insight into potentially the big problem, the one that breaks up the unified whole of the whole image. So let's look at another example with water. Again, this may accurately follow the photo, but the water in the foreground is again surrounded by dark shoreline, and so it's tending to pull our attention down into the pond. If I make a gradated dark on the pond, do you see how our attention is released from the foreground and you flow back into the illusion of depth? If any of these changes don't seem clear at first, go back and just move between the two images so you see the difference of how your eye is engaged with the painting. And one last water image. I'm doing 3 because it's a really common problem. Charming evening scene, but we're really held again in the foreground by the figure and the boat and the figure reflection. Why? Because of the contrast. It's so strong. Now, it may have been like that in the photo, but it pulls our eye again down into the foreground. By darkening the water in the foreground, we still have the figure in the boat, but our eye is now released from the grip of that foreground. And I added a thin line of light at the back of the water, and our attention now slides easily back into deep space. The whole image now feels more integrated. Now, skies can do the same thing. The landscape here is fine, but the contrast of the clouds against the sky in the top left is pulling our attention up there. Soften the contrast, and you can feel your attention fall down into the rest of the image. The painting feels more holistic now. All the pieces fit together as a whole. It's not to say you can't have dramatic clouds in a painting, but how do they integrate with your intention for the rest of the painting? So let's look at another really common issue. Paths and roads, for example, leading off into the distance. The value contrast between the road and both sides of the road is so strong that we're held in the foreground again. But gradate that path, and it allows our attention to push down the road, because we almost always follow gradation from dark to light. And add one little line of light where that road might have ended up over further to the right, and we now read the painting more holistically as a unified image with our attention sliding into depth. When we do a landscape, we aren't trying to hold the viewer's attention in the foreground. I mean, not usually. We're using the #1 convention of Western representational painting and pulling them into the illusion of depth. You don't want to hinder that by unconsciously putting sort of blocks, visual blocks for them on their path into depth. And finally, this one. I like the compositional structure of this one. We see a vertical up to the center of interest, and all these lines pushing us towards that vertical. Except the contrast along the top and bottom of these 2 lines of light are so strong that they are in fact pulling our attention up to the right. Soften those 2 edges by darkening them a bit, and see how our eye is released by them, and now the whole image is more holistic with our attention moving to the compositional structure that we had intended, or that the person had intended. The idea is you want your painting to work as a whole, not to accurately mimic what was in the photo. Or even from life, it's the same thing. Hopefully, before we start, we have an idea of what we're trying to do. That's the idea of the compositional structure before we begin to paint. But sometimes we do things to hinder or undermine that. And so when you're finished your lecture, your thesis, your block-in, you sit down, patient, and begin to listen. Listen for the big problem, the one that most disrupts what you had intended, and solve for that, rather than just working it away at all the little things that might catch your attention. Leave your painting up in the studio, and each time you come in, you're seeing it with fresh eyes. Does anything jump out? Is there something I hadn't noticed before? Listening to your painting. It might start off as a lecture, but towards the end of each painting, it's more and more of a dialogue. I hope you found that helpful. All the very best. See you next time. Bye for now.